happens to be the 10th year anniversary of the dreadful events that happened in New York, in Washington, D.C., and in Pennsylvania. And you know, like several other traumatic things that have happened in our nation, I'm sure each and every one of you remember exactly where you were when those events unfolded that morning. I know I was across the country. I had gone out to Arizona to do a funeral service for a very strong member of the NSAC. He passed extremely suddenly. People were very much in shock. You know, we found out later, many ordained ministers passed right before September 11th. That week before, Presbyterian ministers, Methodist ministers, Catholic priests, we lost several spiritualist ministers. When I say lost, I mean from here in the physical. And as time went by and we had a chance to kind of absorb everything, it came to be very interesting to many of us that all of those unexpected passings of ministers were no mistake, because you had thousands of people passing in the blink of an eye, and extra help was going to be needed in the world of spirit to welcome all those loved ones who passed so quickly nobody understood how or why. Those pastors who were left here on the earth plane, of course, were very busy counseling everyone who was still here, who had lost loved ones. And the chaplains within the police departments, the chaplains within the fire departments, had their hands full. They had not only lost wonderful colleagues, but they had to help the families of those who had passed, and they had to deal with those who had been there, who were continuing to be there, trying to rescue people, trying to deal with the enormity of what they saw. A firefighter was interviewed, and he said there was no amount of training that could prepare any of them for what they had to deal with that day. It was inconceivable that something of that magnitude would happen. Now, for those who did go very quickly, many of us say, well, that's the way we would all want to go. Either go in the blink of an eye, or better still, be like some of those cultures where when you know it's your time, you just wander off and let it happen. That's how we would ideally like it. But when we lose someone so abruptly that way, we know that we've not always had a chance to say goodbye. And you know, we have all of these people on such a pedestal because they were innocent bystanders. There's no question there. But what about those who had had a grumpy morning at home? And maybe the last words they exchanged with a kid or a spouse or a companion, maybe they weren't the better words. And you know, those who are left behind are never going to be able to put that out of their minds. And that's the thing of it, we never really know. We never really know. And of course we're human, of course we get tired, we get cranky, and we may snap at people. But we never know, from moment to moment, what is going to happen next. Now, our affirmations clearly give us the comfort. Declaration 4 and 5. We know that the existence and personal identity continues after physical death. We know that. And we know that we are going to be able to have that communication with them after they leave. It's not quite as simple as knocking on the door and being able to have that wonderful, warm, physical hug, but we know they are going to be around us, and we know that when we think of them with love, with that caring, with missing them, we know they're very aware of that as well. So many in spirit have told me over the years that they want so much to come close to a loved one and let them know they're all right. And the loved one may not have any knowledge that life continues, and yet this wave will sweep over them, and they'll be thinking of that individual in spirit and missing them so much, and they'll start crying. Well, then spirit, none of us like to see somebody we love cry, then spirit will step back again. It's all a matter of learning for each and every one of us. We know that not everybody that went to the world of spirit that day were great people. Not only the people that caused all this horror, but there were no doubt some people that could have made better choices in their lives. But they didn't have time to think about it either. They were gone as well. Which brings us to number 8. We know the door to reformation is never closed. So that includes not only the people that masterminded and carried through those events, but other people whose lives were taken that could have made better choices while they were here. Today is a day to give us pause, to evaluate our own lives, our own actions, our own family members and friends and co-workers and neighbors. It's a reminder to everyone to take a hard look at where we are in life at this time and where we would like to be. And are we going to wait for the hereafter to make those changes, or are we going to start implementing them here and now? We have that choice. We have that choice. Now, although the events of that day were horrifying and get focused on every year about this time, you know there had to be some good things that happened that day. There had to be a wedding or two. I didn't do research, but I know there had to be a lot of babies born that day. There are a lot of babies born every day. And these were events that were signifying new beginnings. So even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, there were so many other wonderful things that happened that day, some scheduled, some not, and yet they were significant of new beginnings. Those events brought the American people closer together as a nation, as a community. It brought families closer together. It was a wake-up call. And while we never ever believed that God would mastermind all this just to give us a wake-up call, no, that was done by some rather twisted individuals. Nevertheless, this very negative thing did end up with some positive results. And those are the things we really need to dwell on without taking anything away from all of those families whose lives were changed forever. We need to recognize out of the darkest, darkest cloud, there will be a ray of sunlight. 6 years ago today, and maybe a lot of you weren't here at that time, but 6 years ago today, the father of our church, Jim McConnell, asked if he could address the congregation. So right before the closing hymn, we said, the father of our church has asked to address the congregation. And I don't know about you, but many of us kind of were holding our breath because it's kind of like hearing you've been called to the principal's office. You just never really are sure. And Jim stood up here and talked about the events of that day, and that, of course, people were always going to remember that negativity. It was always going to be a part of our lives. But he wanted to give people something else good to remember as well. And he called Rose, my mom, up, and on bended knee proposed to her. See, I knew a lot of you weren't here to see that. Well, I have to tell you, Mommy kind of looked like a deer in the headlights. And finally Jim said, well, can't stay on this knee forever. And she accepted, and people were laughing and crying and applauding, and it was wonderful. So good things can happen on any day. And this is something we need to remember as well. Again, we're human. We may lose a job. We may have a financial problem. We may have a health problem. But things can always get better. And if we will hang in there and know that Spirit is with us through the good and the bad, then that makes us stronger. And things will get better. That's a promise that Spirit gives us. We don't deal with anything completely alone unless we choose to slam the door. And sometimes we are dealing with things that are so emotional, or we think they're very catastrophic in our lives, that we can't settle down enough to open up to Spirit. Does that mean that our guides and our teachers on the higher side of life, does that mean, well, okay, if they don't have time for me, I don't have time for them? Of course not. Of course not. It means they come all the closer. They come all the closer. And they will hold us up on times when we think we absolutely cannot stand. And then when we stand and we think, I can't take another step forward, we find that yes, we can. And sometimes we can look back at events on our lives and think, how did I get through this? How did I get through this? And know then, know you got through it because Spirit, with a capital S, infinite intelligence, God, was with you. And Spirit, with a lowercase s, for all of our loved ones that are on the higher side of life, our family members and our friends, doctors, teachers. I was going to make a smart remark about lawyers, but I won't. We are not in this life alone. No matter what happens, no matter how challenging it gets, no matter how hurtful it may seem, we have help. We have help. And it's amazing to me that we will use all the contraptions of this modern society to make our lives easier, to make our lives better. We'll spend a lot of money sometimes on gadgets because we think it's going to make things better. You know what? Spirit is free. They don't charge us an hourly rate. They don't charge us a commission. They don't charge us dues. They're there for us. They're there for us. And it's absolutely free. Absolutely free. The only cost that you have to put into it is your time. That's it. And I know everybody's busy. But if you can't take a little bit of time for the most important thing in life, then is it any wonder the rest of your life seems a little scrambled, a little scattered, sometimes a little less than wonderful. And people say, well, I don't know how to meditate. And it can be a little challenging to turn off all the commotion that's up here all the time. You start by turning off the television. You start by disconnecting the phone or silencing the phone. You start by, it doesn't usually work to shut yourself away from a pet, because if you close a door, an animal is going to meow or bark or scratch at the door. They want to be where you are. So the sooner you teach them that this is a quiet time we can share, the better, because animals enjoy that and they bring their wonderful energy. You simply sit in the silence and give yourself a little bit of time to get used to that wonderful higher vibration that will start coming closer and closer to you. Try for 5 minutes not to think about the next chore that you need to accomplish. Try not to think about your grocery list. Try not to let your daily activities hang over your head. Try to just calm your mind. Don't expect moving pictures in 3D and color. Just allow yourself to feel the change of the energy around you. I bet every person here, if you were just seated on a little bench and you had your eyes closed, I bet every single one of you would know if someone here in the physical came up and just simply stood behind you. You wouldn't have to smell their perfume or anything. You would just sense a presence. And that's the way spirit will come in. You will sense the presence. And it is so calm and so loving. And the love is absolutely unconditional. If you've never had the opportunity to receive unconditional love, take time for spirit. It's nourishing, it's rejuvenating, it will bring you peace. So this day and every day, let's understand that we're here for a purpose. We're here, we're meant to be happy. We're one of God's children. We're meant to work with one another. We're meant to love one another and cherish one another. That's why we're here. Thank you. God bless you all.